My uncle stole my inheritance, so I exposed the lie that built his empire. My name is Marlo. I'm a 34-year-old woman from a small coastal town in California, and I've always been the dreamer of the family, a freelance photographer who values connection and memories over money. My grandfather, a brilliant but humble aerospace machinist, was my rock. He raised me after my parents passed away when I was just 8 years old. He became my entire world, the man who taught me to see beauty in the smallest details, to chase sunsets with my camera, and to believe that integrity mattered more than any bank account ever could. When he died last March, my world didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. But the real devastation, the kind that steals your breath and makes you question everything you thought you knew about your own family, came at the reading of his will. My uncle Marcus, a powerful Silicon Valley tech CEO I'd always looked up to, manipulated the legal process. He presented a revised will, signed during a period when Grandpa was heavily medicated after his second stroke, that left everything to him, the family home overlooking the Pacific, the life savings Grandpa had carefully accumulated over 40 years of meticulous work, everything. He left me with nothing but a single item he dismissed as sentimental junk, my grandfather's old, heavy, metal toolbox. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room in downtown San Jose, all glass and chrome and the kind of cold efficiency that felt like an insult to my grandfather's memory. Marcus sat across from me in a suit that probably cost more than my rent for 6 months, flanked by 2 lawyers whose expressions suggested they'd perfected the art of not feeling anything at all. "I know this must be difficult, Marlo," Marcus said, his voice dripping with a sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. But Dad's wishes were clear. He wanted to ensure his assets were managed by someone with business acumen. I stared at the document in front of me, my hands trembling. He promised me the house. He said it would always be mine. We talked about it 2 months before his first stroke. People's minds change, Marcus said smoothly. Especially near the end. He wanted someone who could preserve his legacy properly. One of the lawyers slid a check across the glossy table. "Mr. Wright has generously offered you $10,000 to help you get back on your feet. It's more than fair, considering." "Considering what?" I interrupted, my voice cracking. "Considering that I'm the one who spent every weekend with him? That I moved back home to take care of him when he got sick? That I held his hand when he—" "Marlo." Marcus's voice hardened just slightly. "Let's not make this emotional. You're a talented photographer. This money will help you pursue your dreams. Isn't that what Grandpa would have wanted?" He reached over and patted my head, actually patted my head, like I was a child being dismissed from adult conversation. The gesture was so condescending, so perfectly calculated to make me feel small, that I couldn't find words. I just sat there, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall in front of him. I signed the papers. What choice did I have? I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't have money to fight this. And some traitorous part of me still wanted to believe that Marcus, successful and sophisticated Marcus, knew something I didn't. That maybe Grandpa really had changed his mind. The toolbox was waiting for me in the parking lot, loaded into the trunk of my beat-up Honda by Marcus's assistant. It was exactly as I remembered it, scratched red metal, heavy enough to require 2 hands, covered in decades of workshop grime and oil stains. Marcus had stood by his Tesla, watching me struggle with it. "Good luck with your photography, Marlo," he'd called out. "And do stay in touch. Family is important." The irony of that statement would haunt me for weeks. My apartment in Santa Cruz was barely 400 square feet, a studio with peeling paint and a view of the parking lot. I'd moved there after Grandpa got sick, wanting to be close to him while still maintaining some independence. Now it felt like a prison cell, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. The toolbox sat in the corner by my closet, a hulking presence I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge. Every time I looked at it, I felt the weight of my grandfather's absence crushing down on me. I threw a blanket over it after the first week, but that somehow made it worse, like I was covering up his memory, ashamed of the only piece of him I had left. I tried to work. I took on wedding gigs and portrait sessions, forcing smiles and adjusting lighting while feeling hollow inside. My clients probably thought I was fine. I'd perfected the art of functioning while falling apart, of nodding at the right moments and delivering beautiful photographs while feeling nothing at all. At night, I'd lie awake and replay every conversation I'd had with Grandpa about the house. He'd been so clear, so insistent. "This house is yours, Marlowe girl," he'd say, using the nickname he'd given me as a child. "Every nail, every memory. I'm putting it in writing. Marcus has his empire, this is for you." But apparently, that writing had been superseded. Replaced by a document signed when he could barely hold a pen, when the medications made him confused and compliant. The lawyers had medical records showing his cognitive decline. What could I say against that? Arthur Finch called 3 weeks after the funeral. I almost didn't answer. I'd been avoiding everyone, existing in a fog of grief and betrayal. But something made me pick up on the fourth ring. "Marlowe? It's Arthur. Arthur Finch. Your grandfather's friend from the aerospace plant?" I sat up straighter. I knew Arthur, vaguely. An elderly man with kind eyes who'd come to a few family dinners over the years. He and Grandpa had worked together for decades, though I'd never paid much attention to the details of their partnership. "Mr. Finch. Hi. I heard about Joseph's will. About Marcus getting everything." His voice was heavy with something I couldn't quite identify. "I need to talk to you, Marlowe. In person. Are you free tomorrow?" We met at a diner in Aptus, one of those old-fashioned places with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since 1987. Arthur was waiting when I arrived, his hands wrapped around a mug, his face lined with an exhaustion that seemed to go deeper than age. "Thank you for coming," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "You sounded serious on the phone." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Serious doesn't begin to cover it." He studied my face for a long moment. "You look like him, you know. You have his eyes. The same way of seeing things. Mr. Finch. Arthur, please. And I'm sorry, Marlowe. I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner. I'm sorry I let fear keep me quiet all these years." He pulled out a worn envelope from his jacket pocket. "Your grandfather and I were partners. Real partners. We worked together on projects after hours, in his garage workshop. He was brilliant, not just good at his job, but genuinely innovative. He saw solutions other people couldn't imagine." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of projects?" "Mostly experiments. Wind energy, specifically. This was back in the 90s, before it was fashionable to care about renewable energy. Joseph was obsessed with efficiency. He kept saying that wind turbines were limited by friction, by the blade design. He thought there had to be a better way." Arthur's hands shook slightly as he opened the envelope and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed 2 men in a cluttered garage, my grandfather, younger but unmistakable, and Arthur, both bent over a workbench covered in sketches and metal components. "He figured it out," Arthur continued, his voice dropping. "After 6 years of trial and error, he designed a low-friction turbine blade that could increase energy capture by almost 40%. It was revolutionary. We tested it, refined it. He even built a prototype. The diner suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. What happened to it?" "Marcus happened." Arthur's expression hardened. "Your uncle used to visit the garage sometimes. Joseph was so proud to show him, to include him. Marcus was in business school then, talking about innovation and disruption. Joseph thought his son might help him bring the invention to market. I could already see where this was going, but I needed to hear it. He stole it. He didn't just steal it, Marlowe. He took the prototype, the schematics, everything. Then he filed for a patent in his own name. When Joseph confronted him, Marcus convinced him, and I mean this took years of psychological manipulation, that the idea wasn't viable. That Joseph was misremembering the timeline, that Joseph's design was flawed. He gaslighted his own father into believing his life's work was worthless. My hands clenched into fists on the tabletop. And you didn't say anything? I tried. Arthur's eyes filled with tears. I tried to tell Joseph what was happening, but Marcus was smart. He'd included just enough changes to the design that it looked different on paper. And Joseph, he wanted to believe in his son. When Marcus's company started taking off, when Aerolon Dynamics became successful, Joseph convinced himself he must have been wrong. That maybe his memory really was faulty. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saw the will. Because I know Marcus has been planning this for years, isolating Joseph, controlling the narrative. And because your grandfather left you something that Marcus doesn't know about. Arthur leaned forward. Before the first stroke, Joseph called me. He was lucid, sharp as ever. He said, if anything happens to me, tell Marlo to look in the toolbox. Tell her everything's in the toolbox. She'll know what to do with it. That night, I finally pulled the blanket off the toolbox. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the latches. The smell of machine oil hit me first, so familiar it brought tears to my eyes. I'd spent hundreds of hours in Grandpa's garage, watching him work, learning the names of tools and the patience required to create something lasting. The top tray held exactly what I expected, wrenches organized by size, socket sets, screwdrivers with worn handles. I lifted out the tray carefully, then the second one beneath it. The bottom of the box was filled with more tools, things that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. I was about to give up, about to decide that Arthur had been mistaken, when my fingers caught on something odd. A slight irregularity in the bottom corner. I pressed, and heard a soft click. The false bottom slid open. My breath caught in my throat. The hidden compartment was lined with what looked like oilcloth, protecting everything inside from moisture and time. With trembling hands, I began removing the contents. First, 3 engineering journals, spiral-bound notebooks with my grandfather's precise, meticulous handwriting covering every page. Diagrams, calculations, sketches of turbine designs that evolved over dozens of pages. Dated entries starting in 1992. Second, a stack of floppy disks in protective sleeves, each one carefully labeled, Project Ether, Test Results, Project Ether, Simulations, Project Ether, Manufacturing Notes. Third, a USB drive in a small plastic case, newer than everything else, with Project Ether, complete files, written on it in Grandpa's shaky late-life handwriting. And finally, a component. A blade, clearly machined by hand, about 6 inches long, with an unusual curved surface and a distinctive groove pattern. It was wrapped in a letter, the paper yellowed but the notary seal still clearly visible. My hands shook as I unfolded it. May 15, 1995. To whom it may concern. I, Joseph Michael Wright, do hereby declare that the attached component is my original design and creation. This low-friction turbine blade represents 6 years of research, development, and testing, conducted in partnership with Arthur James Finch. The design specifications, testing data, and manufacturing process are documented in the accompanying materials. This blade is the prototype for a revolutionary wind energy system capable of increasing energy capture efficiency by 38 to 42% compared to standard turbine designs as of this date. The patent application for this design will be filed under my name and Arthur's name within the next 6 months. This declaration is made to protect our intellectual property and establish clear documentation of the invention's origins and timeline. Signed, Joseph Michael Wright. The signature was witnessed and notarized. The date was clear. And it was 30 years ago, 5 years before Marcus founded Aerolon Dynamics. I spent the entire night going through the journals. Grandpa's entries read like a story, chronicling the evolution of an idea from wild dream to working reality. He documented everything, the failures, the breakthroughs, the moment he realized that changing the blade's surface geometry could reduce drag while increasing lift. There were photographs too, tucked between pages. Grandpa and Arthur in the garage, the workbench covered in prototype pieces. A series of shots showing the blade's evolution, each iteration slightly different from the last. And finally, a photo of the completed prototype, dated August 1995, mounted on a small test rig. I opened my laptop and searched for Betrayal Dynamics. The company website opened with Marcus's face prominent on the homepage, the visionary CEO, the innovator who'd revolutionized wind energy. I clicked through to the technology page. There it was, the AeroFlex blade system, our proprietary design. The description was technical, but the image that accompanied it made my blood run cold. The blade geometry was identical to the one in my hands. The groove pattern, the curved surface, even the specific measurements, everything matched my grandfather's prototype. I kept reading. The patent was filed in 1998, 3 years after Grandpa's notarized letter. The sole inventor listed, Marcus Andrew Wright. The company's origin story was plastered everywhere. Founded in 2000 by Marcus Wright, who spent years perfecting his revolutionary turbine blade design in his garage. A true American success story of innovation and persistence. Every word was a lie. Every interview where Marcus described his moment of inspiration, every award he'd received for innovation, every dollar his company had earned, all of it built on technology he'd stolen from his own father. I called Arthur at 6 in the morning. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. I found everything, I said. The journals, the prototype, the notarized letter. It's all here. His exhale was long and shaky. Thank God. I was afraid Marcus might have destroyed it somehow. Arthur, he built his entire company on this. Betrayal Dynamics is worth billions. And it's all based on Grandpa's design. I know, Marlo. I've known for 25 years. And I've hated myself for staying quiet. Almost as long. We need to take this to a lawyer. We need to take it to the press, Arthur corrected. Lawyers can be bought. Public outrage can't be. But Marlo, you need to understand what you're up against. Marcus has resources. He has connections. He's going to fight this with everything he has. I looked at the prototype blades sitting on my desk, the metal dull with age but the craftsmanship still evident. I don't care. Grandpa deserves the truth. Even if he's not here to see it. Then I'm with you. Every step of the way. The confrontation happened 3 days later. I'd called Marcus's office and told his assistant I needed to discuss family matters urgently. Maybe my tone conveyed something, or maybe he was curious about what his newly impoverished niece could possibly want, but he agreed to see me that afternoon. Betrayal Dynamics headquarters was everything I'd expected, a gleaming tower in Palo Alto, all glass and steel and architectural statements about reaching for the sky. The lobby had a 3-story atrium with a massive wind turbine blade mounted as art, lit dramatically from below. A plaque beneath it read, "The first AeroFlex blade, Marcus Wright's revolutionary 1998 prototype." I stared at it for a full minute, my anger building with each second. That wasn't his prototype. That was my grandfather's design, stolen and rebranded and turned into a trophy. Marcus's office was on the 30th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. He stood as I entered, his smile practiced and empty. "Marlo. This is unexpected. Please, sit." He gestured to a chair across from his desk, a slab of glass that probably cost more than my car. I didn't sit. Instead, I placed my bag on his desk and pulled out the prototype blade, setting it on the glass with a solid thunk. Marcus's smile faltered. Just for a second, but I saw it, a flicker of recognition, of shock, of fear. "What's this?" His voice was casual, but his eyes were locked on the blade. "You know what it is." I pulled out one of the journals next, then another, stacking them deliberately. "Project Ether. Your father's revolutionary turbine blade design. Created in 1995, documented in meticulous detail. Notarized. Dated. Proven." The color drained from his face. He reached for the journal, but I pulled it back. "You stole his life's work," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You took his prototype, filed a patent in your own name, and built a billion-dollar company on his innovation. Then you spent years convincing him he was wrong, that he was confused, that his memory was failing him. You gaslight your own father. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, his expression shifted. The shock disappeared, replaced by something harder. Colder. You can't prove any of that. I have his journals. His prototype. A notarized letter from 1995 establishing his intellectual property claim. I have Arthur Finch willing to testify to everything that happened. I have photographs, documentation, a timeline that shows your patent came years after his invention. And I have an army of lawyers who will tear apart any case you try to build. Marcus moved to a panel on the wall, opening it to reveal a small bar. He poured himself a scotch, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Let's be realistic, Marlowe. You're a freelance photographer with no legal experience and no money. You think you can take on a multi-billion-dollar corporation? Even if, and this is a big if, you could prove that Dad had some early concepts for turbine design, I've made significant innovations and improvements over the years. The Aeroflex blade is not the same as whatever crude prototype he tinkered with. It's identical, I shot back. Down to the groove pattern and blade geometry. You made cosmetic changes and called it innovation. He sipped his scotch, studying me over the rim of the glass. You know what I think? I think you're grieving. You're angry about the will, and you're looking for someone to blame. You've convinced yourself of this conspiracy theory because it's easier than accepting that Dad chose to leave his estate to someone who could actually manage it properly. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, I could almost see how Grandpa had fallen for it. How anyone would fall for it, faced with Marcus's confidence and resources. I'm going public with this, I said. I'm going to the press, to the SEC, to anyone who will listen. Marcus set down his glass and pulled out his checkbook. He wrote something quickly, tore off the check, and slid it across the desk. My eyes dropped to it automatically. $5 million. Take it, Marlowe. His voice was soft now, almost kind. You'll never win in court. My lawyers will bury you in motions and appeals for years. You'll spend everything you have, destroy your own life, and accomplish nothing. But with this money, you could build a real career. Travel the world as a photographer. Live comfortably. Honor Dad's memory in your own way. I stared at the check. $5 million. It would change my life. I could. No. I picked up the check. Marcus's smile widened slightly, triumphant. Then I tore it in half. Then in half again. I let the pieces flutter onto his pristine desk like confetti. I don't want your money, I whispered, my voice barely audible but steady. I want your truth. I want the world to know who you really are. His expression hardened. You're making a mistake. No. You made the mistake 30 years ago when you stole from your father. I'm just correcting it. I gathered the journals and prototype back into my bag. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, but I felt something I hadn't felt in months, purpose. Enjoy your office while you still have it, I said, turning toward the door. Because I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly how you got here. The next 3 weeks were a blur. Arthur connected me with an intellectual property lawyer named Rebecca Chen, a sharp woman in her 40s who took one look at the evidence and immediately understood the implications. This is huge, she said, spreading the journals across her conference table. If you can prove the timeline, and with this notarized letter, you have a legitimate case for patent fraud. The damages could be astronomical. I don't care about damages, I said. I care about the truth. Rebecca looked at me over her reading glasses. The truth and justice aren't always the same thing, Marlowe. But in this case, I think we can get you both. We built the case methodically. Rebecca hired a handwriting expert who confirmed that all the journal entries were authentic and matched known samples of my grandfather's writing. A metallurgist examined the prototype blade and confirmed it showed signs of age consistent with 1990s manufacturing techniques. A patent attorney compared Grandpa's documented designs with Marcus's patent filing and found them virtually identical. But Rebecca was right about one thing: Marcus's lawyers were formidable. They immediately filed motions to suppress evidence, claiming the journals and prototype had been obtained through questionable means. They demanded mental health evaluations, implying I was suffering from grief-induced delusions. They dragged Arthur's name through the mud, painting him as a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. The legal battle was exhausting and expensive. Rebecca was working partially on contingency, but I still had to pay court fees, expert witness fees, filing costs. I sold my camera equipment, everything. Except the one Nikon Grandpa had given me for my 21st birthday. I moved to an even smaller apartment. I lived on instant noodles and bargain bin groceries. But I didn't give up. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former Aerolon Dynamics engineer named David Park reached out through Rebecca's office. He'd worked at the company in its early days and had always wondered about the blade design's origins. Marcus used to say he'd been working on it for years before founding the company, David said during our video call. But when I saw the original design files, they were dated 1998. And they were complete. Like, fully realized. There was no evolution, no iteration. It was just suddenly there, perfect. That never happens in engineering. David provided internal documents showing that Marcus had presented the blade design to his initial investors as a finished concept, not something he developed gradually. The timeline proved that Marcus couldn't possibly have spent years perfecting it. He'd started with a complete design. It was another piece of evidence, another thread pulling at Marcus's story. Then I got lucky, or rather, Marcus's ego betrayed him. The San Francisco Tech Innovators Association announced that Marcus Wright would be honored as their Innovator of the Year at their annual gala. The award recognized his revolutionary contributions to renewable energy and his inspirational journey from garage inventor to industry leader. The gala was scheduled for May 15th, exactly 30 years after Grandpa had signed his notarized declaration. I need to be there, I told Rebecca. She frowned. Marlo, I don't think that's a good idea. If you confront him publicly, it could hurt our case. I'm not going to confront him. I'm going to tell the truth. There's a difference. Arthur agreed immediately. Joseph would have wanted this, he said. Not revenge, justice. Public, undeniable justice. I spent a week preparing. I scanned every page of the journals, digitized the photographs, created a timeline showing the evolution of Project Ether. I practiced what I would say, how I would say it. I bought a dress from a thrift store, simple, black, dignified. Grandpa always said to let your work speak loudest. The night before the gala, I stood in my tiny apartment, looking at everything spread across my floor. The journals, the photos, the prototype blade. 30 years of hidden truth, about to see light. My phone rang. Marcus's number. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won out. Marlo. His voice was tired. I'm calling to give you one last chance. Don't come tomorrow. Don't do this. Why shouldn't I? Because you'll regret it. Because even if you expose me, you'll destroy yourself in the process. The media will paint you as a vindictive relative. My lawyers will sue you for defamation. Your life will become hell. Maybe, I said quietly. But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Your grandfather wouldn't have wanted this. He wouldn't have wanted you to throw your life away for his sake. That was the line that snapped my last thread of doubt. You didn't know him at all, did you? Not really. Because if you had, you'd know that integrity was everything to him. He would rather have died unknown than lived as a lie. And that's exactly what you've been, Marcus. A lie. I hung up before he could respond. The San Francisco Fairmont Hotel was everything I wasn't: luxurious, polished, expensive. The gala was being held in their largest ballroom, a space that probably cost more to rent for one night than I'd earn in a year. Everyone was in formal wear, sipping champagne, networking with the casual ease of people who belonged in rooms like this. I didn't belong. My thrift store dress felt obvious, my shoes were uncomfortable, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. But I had a press pass. Rebecca had used her connections to get me credentialed as a freelance photojournalist, and a leather portfolio containing every piece of evidence we'd compiled. Marcus was at the center of everything, of course. He looked distinguished in his tuxedo, silver hair perfectly styled, playing the role of humble innovator to perfection. I watched him pose for photos, accept congratulations, laugh at jokes from men in expensive suits. He was good at this. He'd been playing this role for so long, he probably believed it himself. The ceremony began at 8. I sat in the back row, my heart hammering so hard I thought everyone must be able to hear it. There were speeches, video tributes, a highlight reel of Aerolon Dynamics accomplishments. The screen showed Marcus in a hard hat touring wind farms, Marcus shaking hands with politicians, Marcus accepting other awards. Then came the main event. The association's president, a jovial man with a booming voice, took the stage. Our innovator of the year needs no introduction. Marcus Wright transformed renewable energy through sheer brilliance and determination. His revolutionary turbine blade design, developed through years of painstaking work in his garage workshop, has changed the industry forever. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marcus Wright. The applause was thunderous. Marcus took the stage, accepting a crystal trophy, his smile humble and grateful. He began his speech, the same story I'd read in a dozen interviews, the struggle, the failures, the eureka moment, the determination to make his dream real. Every word was a knife in my chest. Not because they hurt me, but because they erased Grandpa. Because they took his life's work and attributed it to the man who'd stolen it. The speech was supposed to last 15 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. I waited, forcing myself to breathe, until Marcus opened the floor to questions. A few reporters asked softball questions about the company's future plans, about advice for young entrepreneurs. Marcus answered with practiced ease, clearly comfortable in the spotlight. Then I stood up. The movement caught the attention of a camera operator near me. He swung his lens my direction out of instinct. I cleared my throat, and a volunteer brought me a microphone. "Mr. Wright," I said, my voice shaking but clear. Every head in the room turned. Marcus's eyes found mine, and I saw the recognition, the alarm, the warning in his expression. "You've told the story of your garage-born inspiration so many times tonight. The years of painstaking development, the determination to perfect your design. Could you tell us about the real moment of inspiration? The one that happened 30 years ago today?" The room went silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Marcus's voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "My name is Marlo Wright. I'm your niece. And I'm here to talk about my grandfather, Joseph Wright. The real inventor of the Aeroflex blade." I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the prototype blade, holding it up. The stage lights caught the metal, making it gleam. Camera flashes started going off like fireworks. "This is the original prototype," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Created by Joseph Wright in 1995, 5 years before Aerolon Dynamics was founded. 3 years before your patent was filed. I have his engineering journals documenting the entire development process. I have a notarized letter from May 15, 1995, exactly 30 years ago, establishing his intellectual property claim. I have photographs, witness testimony, and metallurgical evidence proving the age and authenticity of this blade." Marcus stepped toward the edge of the stage. "This is inappropriate. Security." "I have his complete documentation," I continued, speaking faster now as security guards began moving through the crowd. "Every calculation, every test result, every iteration of the design. And it all predates your patent by years. Rebecca had arranged for this. She'd contacted 3 major news outlets ahead of time, telling them there would be a major story breaking at the gala. Their reporters were in the audience, cameras rolling, capturing everything." I clicked the remote I'd palmed in my other hand. The massive screens behind Marcus, the ones that had been showing his highlight reel, suddenly lit up with scanned pages from Grandpa's journals. The pages were damning. His precise handwriting, dated entries, detailed diagrams of the turbine blades showing the exact geometry that Aerolon Dynamics had patented. Test results from 1994 and 1995. Photos of the prototype being built, step by step. The timeline was irrefutable. The similarities were undeniable. The room erupted. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Camera flashes became a strobe effect. The association president was trying to restore order, but no one was listening. Marcus's face had gone from confident to pale to flushed red. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. For the first time in his life, he had no smooth answer, no practiced response. I held up my grandfather's photograph, one of him in his garage, bent over the workbench, the prototype visible in the frame. The date stamp in the corner read, August 12, 1995. Joseph Wright was a brilliant engineer who trusted his son, I said, my voice breaking slightly. And that son stole his life's work, filed a patent in his own name, and built a fortune on a lie. My grandfather died believing his invention was worthless, that his memory was failing him, that his dreams were delusions. He died never knowing that his son had betrayed him in the worst possible way. The security guards reached me, but the damage was done. Every major news outlet in the room had the story. The images were already spreading online. Marcus stood frozen on stage, his moment of triumph turned to ash. As the guards escorted me out, gently, clearly uncertain about the situation, I looked back one last time. Marcus had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. The crystal trophy sat abandoned on the podium. I'd won. Not money, not revenge, but something better, truth. The aftermath was explosive. Within hours, the story was on every major news site. Tech CEO built empire on stolen technology. The real inventor behind Aerolon Dynamics. Silicon Valley's latest fraud scandal. Marcus's lawyers immediately went on the offensive, releasing statements about outrageous accusations and family disputes. But the evidence was too strong, too well documented. Within days, 3 separate investigations were launched, by the SEC, the Patent and Trademark Office, and the California Attorney General. Former Aerolon Dynamics employees started coming forward, speaking anonymously at first, then openly. They described Marcus's obsessive secrecy about the blade design's origins, his refusal to explain his development process, the suspiciously complete nature of the initial patents. The company's stock price plummeted. Board members demanded answers. Investors filed lawsuits. And I returned to my tiny apartment, exhausted but finally at peace. Rebecca called a week later with news. Marcus's lawyers want to settle. They're offering the family home back, plus enough to cover your legal fees and then some. They want you to sign an NDA and agree not to pursue further action. What about Grandpa's name? What about his credit as the inventor? That's trickier. They won't admit wrongdoing, but they're willing to add a historical acknowledgement to their website and materials. Building on the foundational work of aerospace engineer Joseph Wright or something similar. It wasn't everything. But it was something. What do you think I should do? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I think you've already won the war, Marlowe. The public knows the truth. History will remember Joseph Wright. The question is whether you want to spend the next 5 years in court battles, or whether you want to move forward and build something positive. I thought of Grandpa, of his patient hands teaching me to use tools, of his quiet pride in his work. He'd never been interested in glory or recognition. He just wanted to create something meaningful, something that helped people. I'll take the settlement, I said. On one condition. I want funding to start a foundation in his name. Something that helps young inventors protect their intellectual property, that provides resources and legal support so no one else gets stolen from like he did. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of the house I'd thought I'd lost forever. The movers had already brought my meager possessions. I walked through the door with the original toolbox in my hands, setting it carefully in the garage workshop where it had always belonged. The house smelled like dust and memories. Marcus had never moved in, it had sat empty since Grandpa died, a trophy he'd never intended to use. But the bones were good, the structure sound. I could make it home again. Arthur came by that evening with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. We sat on the back porch overlooking the Pacific, watching the sun paint the water in shades of copper and gold. He would have been proud of you, Arthur said quietly. Not for destroying Marcus, Joseph never wanted that. But for standing up. For refusing to let the lie become history. I keep thinking about what you said. That truth and justice aren't always the same thing. But sometimes they are. Arthur raised his glass. To Joseph Wright. The real innovator. We drank to that, to second chances and recovered legacies and the long, difficult path to making things right. The Joseph Wright Foundation launched 3 months later. The settlement money, combined with donations that poured in after the story went viral, gave us a starting budget of $2.3 million. It wasn't billions, but it was enough to begin. We set up our office in what had been Grandpa's garage workshop. I kept his workbench exactly as it had been, tools still organized in their designated places, his reading glasses still perched on the shelf. It felt right to work in the space where Project Ether had been born. Our mission was simple: provide legal resources, patent assistance, and mentorship to independent inventors and small engineering firms. We partnered with intellectual property lawyers who offered pro bono services. We created educational programs about protecting innovations. We documented invention timelines to establish clear provenance. In our first year, we helped 43 inventors file patents. We stopped 2 cases of potential IP theft before they could escalate. We connected young engineers with manufacturers who could bring their ideas to market ethically and fairly. Grandpa's story became our founding narrative, the reason we existed. But we made sure to frame it correctly, not as revenge, but as a cautionary tale. A reminder that innovation requires not just brilliance, but protection. That trust can be weaponized. That family doesn't guarantee integrity. The media attention eventually faded, as it always does. New scandals emerged, other stories dominated the headlines. But the investigations continued. The SEC ultimately fined Aerolon Dynamics $47 million for material misrepresentations in patent filings and investor communications. Marcus was forced to resign as CEO. He retained his shares. The legal system could only do so much, but his reputation was destroyed. He'd never work in Silicon Valley again. The Patent and Trademark Office added Joseph Wright's name to the original Aeroflex blade patent as co-inventor, a rare retroactive amendment. It didn't change the ownership structure, but it changed the record. History now acknowledged the truth. Some people called me a hero. Others said I destroyed a company and cost people their jobs for revenge. I tried not to read the comments, the think pieces, the Reddit threads dissecting my motives. I knew why I'd done it, and that was enough. 6 months after the gala, I got an unexpected letter. The return address was a P.O. box in Montana, no name. Inside was a single handwritten page. Marlowe. You don't know me, but I worked with your grandfather at the aerospace plant in the 70s. I was an apprentice machinist, fresh out of trade school, and Joseph took me under his wing. He taught me everything I know about precision work, about integrity in engineering, about doing things right even when no one's watching. I heard what happened. What you did. I wanted you to know that there are hundreds of us out here, people whose lives were changed by your grandfather's kindness and expertise. He never sought recognition, never demanded credit. He just did excellent work and helped others learn to do the same. I've never forgotten him. And now, thanks to you, the world won't either. Thank you for giving him the legacy he deserved. Frank Martinez. I pinned that letter to the bulletin board in the workshop, next to a photo of Grandpa in his prime. Over the following months, more letters arrived. Former colleagues, students he'd mentored, people who'd worked with him on community projects I'd never known about. Each one added another dimension to the man I thought I'd known completely. He'd been more than my grandfather, more than an inventor. He'd been a teacher, a mentor, a quiet force for good in dozens of lives. And they all remembered him. A year after the gala, I was in the workshop reviewing a patent application when I heard a car pull up outside. I wasn't expecting anyone. Arthur was in Sacramento visiting his daughter, and we didn't have any appointments scheduled. I walked to the front window and felt my stomach drop. Marcus's Tesla was parked in the driveway. I hadn't seen him since the gala. His lawyers and mine had handled all the settlement negotiations. I'd assumed, or maybe just hoped, that I'd never have to face him again. He got out slowly, looking diminished somehow. He'd lost weight. His hair, always perfectly styled, looked unkempt. The confidence that had defined him was gone, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion. I opened the door before he could knock. "What are you doing here?" "I don't know," he said, and his voice was different too. Quieter. "I've driven by 3 times in the past month. I couldn't make myself stop. Today I did." "You shouldn't be here." "The settlement agreement." "I'm not here about the settlement. I'm not here to threaten you or offer you anything." He looked past me at the house, his childhood home. "Can I come in? Just for a minute?" Every instinct screamed at me to say no. But something in his face, some quality I'd never seen before, made me step aside. He walked in slowly, looking around at the changes I'd made. I'd redecorated, making the space mine while honoring its history. Grandpa's photographs were on the walls, him as a young man, him at work, him with me at various ages. Marcus stopped in front of one photo I'd enlarged and framed. It showed Grandpa and a young Marcus, maybe 8 years old, working together on some project in the garage. Both were smiling, focused on the work, connected in the way fathers and sons should be. "I remember this day," Marcus said quietly. "We were building a soapbox racer. He let me use the real tools, not the toy ones. I felt so grown up." He touched the frame gently. "When did it change? When did I stop being that kid? You stole from him." I couldn't keep the anger from my voice. "You didn't just take his invention, you made him doubt himself. You gaslit your own father for years." "I know." Marcus turned to face me, and I was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "I know what I did. I've known for 30 years. And I've spent every single day justifying it, rationalizing it, convincing myself it didn't matter because I made the technology successful. Because I built something with it. That doesn't make it right." "No. It doesn't." He sat down heavily in one of the chairs, uninvited, like his strings had been cut. "You want to know the worst part? I could have shared credit. I could have made him a co-founder, listed him as co-inventor, given him recognition. The company would have been just as successful. Maybe more so, his engineering expertise would have been invaluable. So why didn't you?" The silence stretched between us, heavy with 30 years of consequences. "Because I wanted it to be mine," he finally said. "I wanted to be the genius, the innovator, the one everyone admired. I was so tired of being Joseph Wright's son, of standing in his shadow. I wanted my own shadow. And when I saw what he'd created, I didn't see my father's achievement. I saw my opportunity. That's not an explanation. That's just selfishness." "Yes. It is." Marcus looked at me directly for the first time. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, Marlo. I don't deserve it, and I know I won't get it. I'm here because I need you to know that I understand what I took from him. From you. From everyone. And I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air. It felt inadequate, too small for the magnitude of what he'd done. But it was also the first time he'd admitted the truth without lawyers or press releases or carefully worded statements. "He loved you," I said, my voice breaking. "Until the very end, even when he was confused, even when you convinced him his memories were wrong, he loved you. He kept a photo of you in his wallet. He told me once that his proudest achievement wasn't any invention. It was raising you. Marcus put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. I stood there, watching him cry, feeling no satisfaction in it. Just a deep, aching sadness for everything that had been broken and couldn't be repaired. You should go, I said eventually. He nodded, wiping his eyes, and stood. At the door, he paused. The foundation you started, it's good work. Important work. He would have loved it. I know. If you ever need funding. No. The word came out sharp. I don't want your money, Marcus. I don't want anything from you. He nodded, accepting this. I know. But the offer stands. Not to make myself feel better. Not to buy absolution. Just because it's the right thing, and I've spent 30 years doing the wrong things. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the house that was finally, truly mine. I never saw him again. But 6 months later, an anonymous donation of $1 million appeared in the foundation's account. Rebecca traced it through shell companies and offshore accounts, finally confirming what I already knew. It had come from Marcus. I thought about returning it. But that felt like pride, like cutting off my nose to spite my face. The foundation could do a lot of good with that money. And maybe, it was the closest Marcus could come to making amends. I kept it. But I made sure every inventor we helped knew the full story. Not a sanitized version, not a redemption arc, but the truth, innovation stolen, a man betrayed, and the long fight to reclaim what was right. 3 years after the gala, I was invited to speak at MIT's engineering school. They wanted me to talk about intellectual property protection, about the importance of documentation, about standing up for truth. I stood at the podium looking out at 200 eager young faces, the next generation of engineers and inventors, and I held up the prototype blade. This piece of metal is 30 years old, I told them. It represents 6 years of work, countless failed experiments, and one brilliant man's determination to make the world better. It also represents betrayal, theft, and the danger of misplaced trust. I told them Grandpa's story. All of it. The innovation, the theft, the gaslighting, the consequences. I told them about the toolbox with its false bottom, about Arthur's courage in coming forward, about the investigation and the settlement and the foundation. But most importantly, I told them about Joseph Wright himself. Not as a victim or a martyr, but as an engineer who loved his work. Who saw problems and created solutions. Who believed that innovation should serve humanity, not ego. Document everything, I told them. Trust, but verify. Protect your ideas not because you're paranoid, but because your work matters. Because the world needs your innovations, and you deserve credit for your brilliance. After the speech, students lined up to ask questions, to share their own stories, to thank me. One young woman, maybe 22, waited until everyone else had left. My grandfather was an inventor too, she said quietly. He created a water filtration system that could have changed lives in developing countries. But a corporation stole his design, and he spent his last years fighting legal battles he couldn't afford to win. He died before he got justice. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for winning. It gives me hope that maybe someday I can do the same for him. I pulled one of the foundation's business cards from my bag and pressed it into her hand. Call us. Bring his documentation. Let's see what we can do. That was the moment I realized the full meaning of what we'd built. The foundation wasn't just about honoring Grandpa. It was about preventing future betrayals, protecting future Josephs, ensuring that brilliance wasn't stolen and buried and lost to history. 5 years after Grandpa's death, I stood in the garage workshop with Arthur, reviewing applications. The foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We had a full staff now, real offices in addition to the workshop space, partnerships with universities and legal aid organizations. We've helped over 200 inventors, Arthur said, looking at our annual report. 43 patents filed. 7 cases of theft prevented or reversed. 26 mentorship matches. It's not enough, I said, but I was smiling. It never will be. But it's something. It's a hell of something. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca, turn on CNN. I pulled up the news on my laptop. There was Marcus, being interviewed about his new role as a consultant for ethics in tech companies. The headline read, Fallen CEO finds redemption in reform. Arthur leaned over my shoulder to watch. Marcus looked older, grayer. He talked about his mistakes with careful precision, about the importance of integrity, about how success built on lies ultimately collapses. He's monetizing his redemption, Arthur said with disgust. Turning his crimes into a consulting career. Maybe, I said. Or maybe he's actually trying to make things right in the only way he knows how. I don't know if I believe in redemption for what he did. But I know Grandpa would have wanted me to keep the door open to the possibility. Arthur shook his head. You're more forgiving than I am. I'm not forgiving him. I'm just trying to live by Grandpa's principles. He always said that bitterness was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I closed the laptop and looked around the workshop. The toolbox sat on a shelf now, its false bottom permanently open, its secrets long since revealed. But it was still here, still present, a reminder of where everything had started. On the wall beside it, I'd hung the first patent we'd helped file through the foundation. And next to that, a framed quote from one of Grandpa's journals. Innovation without integrity is just theft with better marketing. That was his legacy. Not the turbine blade, not the technology, but the principle. The belief that how you create matters as much as what you create. That your work should make you proud, not just successful. I picked up the prototype blade from its display case, feeling its weight in my hands. The metal was cool and solid, unchanged by time or truth or justice. It was just a piece of engineering, brilliant in its simplicity. But it had changed everything. On what would have been Grandpa's 80th birthday, I held a small ceremony at the house. Arthur came, along with Rebecca, some of the foundation staff, and a handful of Grandpa's old colleagues, the ones who'd written letters, who'd remembered him, who'd cared enough to reach out. We planted a tree in the backyard, a coastal redwood that would outlive us all. I read from his journals, sharing his words about innovation and integrity. We raised glasses to his memory, to the work he'd done, to the foundation built in his name. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in Grandpa's favorite colors, I felt something I hadn't felt since before he died, peace. The past couldn't be changed. Marcus had stolen years of credit and recognition. Grandpa had died never knowing his work would be acknowledged. Those injustices would always exist, fixed in the timeline of history. But the future could be different. Every inventor we helped, every patent we protected, every young engineer we mentored, that was Grandpa's legacy continuing forward. That was his work making the world better, exactly as he'd always intended. I stood on the porch after everyone left, looking at the workshop through the window. The lights were off, but I could see the outline of his workbench, the shadow of the toolbox, the shape of everything he'd left behind. I did it, Grandpa, I whispered. I gave you back your name. I told your truth. And I'm going to keep telling it, keep fighting for others, keep honoring what you taught me. Not just about engineering or innovation, but about standing up for what's right even when it's hard. The wind off the ocean carried my words away, and I liked to imagine they reached him somehow. That wherever he was, he knew. That he was proud. I went inside and turned on the workshop lights. There was work to do, applications to review, inventors to help, problems to solve. The same work Grandpa had done in his own way, in his own time. I pulled out my laptop and opened the first file. A young engineer from Detroit had designed a new type of solar panel. She'd sent us her documentation, asking for help with the patent process. She was exactly the kind of person Grandpa would have mentored, would have believed in. I started reading, making notes, already thinking about how we could help her protect her innovation. Already thinking about how to ensure her brilliance wasn't stolen, her work not erased, her legacy not betrayed. This was my inheritance. Not money or property or material things. but purpose. The knowledge that I could make a difference, that I could fight for others the way I'd fought for Grandpa. That I could turn his tragedy into protection for countless others. My uncle had tried to steal my inheritance, thinking it was measured in dollars and deeds. But he'd failed. Because the real inheritance was never in the will. It was in the toolbox, in the journals, in the principles Grandpa lived by and the example he set. It was in knowing what mattered. And it was in having the courage to fight for it. I smiled and got to work. There were inventors to protect, innovations to safeguard, legacies to preserve. And I had a foundation, literal and metaphorical, built on truth. Grandpa's empire wasn't made of lies and stolen technology. It was made of this, the quiet determination to do right, the courage to stand for truth, and the belief that integrity matters more than success. That was his gift to me. And I would spend the rest of my life paying it forward. Please like, comment, and share. If this is your first time watching my video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you'll be notified whenever I post a new story.